Welcome back, Year 12s. This lesson or this video pretty much covers kind of what we would do in two full lessons in class. I'll upload it all in one bit so you can work through it at your own pace. But yeah, like I said, it is pretty much a week's worth of work. So it might be a good idea to spread it across two sessions, or at least make sure you're kind of giving yourself enough time to go through it and answer all the questions to do with it. I've done the questions in a Google Doc this time rather than the quiz. Someone made a really good point that the Google Docs are handy because you can go back and use it for your study later on. So I have uploaded it all in one document. In terms of getting it done, make sure it's all done by the end of this week. But I'll be going in, make sure you're working on it basically during each session. If I go in and you haven't done any work within the Google Doc, then I'll be marking you as not attended. All right, so in the last session, we kind of introduced these characteristics of primates, hominoids, and hominins. Remembering that primates is kind of a really broad category that includes monkeys and all the great apes. Hominoids would be kind of the great apes plus humans. Both extinct and current humans, and then hominins are our human species, extinct and current. So that's kind of what we're going to focus on in these two sessions. What we'll cover is the major trends in hominin evolution. So we're really focusing on the evolution of human species, and then we're also going to look at kind of some things that have been picked up when we've looked at the fossil record. As we go through, I'll probably tell you when you should pause and maybe take a break or wait and continue in the next lesson. This connects to section 14b in the textbook, the trends in hominin evolution. I just want to note here that there is a section in there on cultural evolution, which looks at things like when humans developed communication and culture and art and things like that. That has been removed from the study design for 2020. So that little last bit in 14b, you do not need to know for the exam. All right, this is what we looked at last time. Remember the features of hominoids. So all primates have things like 3D vision because of our forward-facing eyes and kind of flexible arms and legs. We're all very social. Hominoids, which are kind of the great apes as well as humans, so we don't have tails, have relatively long arms and have a big head for our big brains. Hominins, and this is really what we're focusing on now. Remember, hominins can walk upright, so bipedal. They can communicate to varying degrees. Very early communication would have been very simple. And then because of that communication, we have more complex social groups. It is really important that you understand these things so you can look at the trends over time. So how we evolved certain features that supported these things. So that's just a recap there. We also introduced at the end of the last lesson this kind of order of human evolution. And remember, I pointed out there's a few key ones that you really need to know. So if we start with Australopithecus, and hopefully you're practicing saying that. So Australopithecus afarensis is what we currently know to be the first hominin, and that was around 4 million years ago. I know this is 3 million years ago, but since then older fossils have been found. Australopithecus then diverged. So we had two kind of speciation avenues. More Australopithecine groups evolved from that. They all died out. Okay, these were quite small human-like early ancestors, but what we're concerned with is this kind of route here. So Homo habilis showed up around 2 million years ago. So Homo habilis evolved from Australopithecus afarensis. Then we had Homo erectus emerging around 1.5 million years ago from Homo habilis. And then more recently, obviously, we have Homo sapiens, which is us now. There was also a group called Homo sapien neanderthalensis, or better known as the Neanderthals, and also some other sapien groups, which we'll look at later today. But these ones you really kind of should know what they are and when they were around. Okay, so if you just go into question 1 and 2 and answer those, it might be a good idea to take this picture from the slides and just include it in your notes. All right, when we look at the trends now, I think it's really important to understand what these trends supported or what caused them. And if you have an idea of that, you should be able to figure out most of these things. They do kind of make sense. So we're talking about how did we get from being an ape, so a great ape ancestor, to being a human. So you need to understand the difference between humans and apes in terms of function and movement and structure. So the key things we look at here is bipedalism. So being able to walk on 2 legs. A lot of the trends either supported that or were because of that. Another big one is our diet. Humans eat quite different food to apes. We'll look at that in a minute. And then the last one is the increased intelligence. Okay, all of the trends kind of support these things. If you're thinking about them, it should make sense. And then as we go through it, I'll highlight what they relate to. The trends are broken into 3 groups. We have structural changes, so changes that happened to the skeleton, to our physical bodies. There was obviously lots of changes, but the main ones we look at are to do with the skull, the spine, and also our feet and legs. Then because of those structural changes, we had functional changes. Because our bodies were made different, we could do different things with it. So we'll look at them kind of briefly. And then, of course, cognitive changes. Because of our bigger brains, we were able to do different things with our brain. Okay, so we'll go through each of these. Kind of the main one is the structural changes, and this tends to be what comes up the most in exam questions. It's really important you understand how we walk, to understand the changes that support being bipedal. So remember, walking upright is the same as bipedalism. So we're basically talking about walking on 2 feet here. If you want to pause here for a second, it might be a good idea. Look at this picture here of a gorilla skeleton versus a human skeleton from the side. And then also this is just looking at the pelvis from the bottom this is a chimpanzee and a human. Maybe just pause for a second and just, what do you notice? What are the things that need to happen for us to be able to walk on 2 legs as opposed to walking on all 4? The 3 main things that you need to be able to do is your head must be positioned in the middle of your body. So if we look at, if we look at the midline being here, so human's head is right in that midline, okay? With a gorilla, the midline is here, and you'll see that the head is not near there, okay? They cannot walk just on those 2 legs because of the position of the head. The second thing is that the upper body must keep weight over the pelvis. Again, if we look at the pelvis here, our body weight is directly above our pelvis. Again, if we looked at the gorilla, that is not the case. The pelvis is back here and the rest of the body weight is here. Okay, so this is kind of basic physics. You can't possibly walk with that. And then our final one is that the leg must remain stable to support the weight of the body. And if we look here, if we've got the pelvis here of a human, you'll see that our knees go in. And that means that, see here, the left foot has been lifted off. So when you are standing on 1 foot, your body weight comes over that knee and that foot, and you can balance. Compared to the chimpanzee over here, where the legs are kind of straight down, and I always get someone in class to stand up and recreate these. If you tried to walk with your feet 10 or 15 centimeters away from each other, if you got up now and tried to do that, you'll find that it's pretty hard to walk because your feet are too far apart. Your body weight isn't being shared evenly. You don't necessarily need to write these down. I think you need to understand these. Honestly, I know this sounds ridiculous. Get up, walk normally, pay attention to where your feet go when you walk normally. Then I want you to try and do a chimp walk or a gorilla walk. Okay, so drop your body forward, walk with your feet out on either side, make sure your head is hanging down, and just feel what is different in your body. There's a really good little video here. I've also put the link in the Google Doc, so I'll just play it very briefly now, but watch the whole thing. There's no talking or anything with it, but it does show the gait patterns or the walking patterns of a chimpanzee versus Lucy, who was the first Australopithecus afarensis that was found. Okay, so you can see there the differences in the walking. Look at where her head is positioned. The shoulders are relaxing down. You'll notice a chimpanzee can walk on two legs, but it's not efficient and they can't do it for long. Okay, so they can do it for a little bit, and then because of their body structure, they will need to drop back down onto all fours. And then it will show the same thing, but now with a more modern human Homo sapien, and even there, some differences between that and Lucy. Okay, so watch the whole thing. It's only 2 minutes. Watch the whole thing in the link, and we'll move on here. Okay, we'll go through the structural changes in groups. So we're going to start with the skull. These questions always come up in the exam. Okay, so one of the first trends we see, and I remember we're seeing from ape to ancient Homo sapien, ancient Homo genuses to modern humans. So that's the trends we're looking at over time in evolution. What happened? So first thing is the cranial or the head capacity increased. Our skull got bigger, basically. This section here got bigger, and the reason for that is that our brains were getting bigger. So we needed more space to hold that. You can particularly see down here, there's quite a big difference. Second one, the zygomatic arch, which is this thing here. It's kind of like if you feel the side of your head, that kind of hard cheekbone, that is your zygomatic arch. That, along with the jaw and the teeth, all got smaller. Okay, and this is because our diet changed. So apes are herbivores, they eat plants, and that takes a lot of digestion and a lot of chewing. If you think about before we were able to cook things, just eating raw plants and trees and all of those kind of things, lots and lots and lots of chewing. So the muscles in the face had to be really, really strong for that. As we evolved, we started eating more meat because we were able to hunt, and we also then discovered fire and the ability to cook food, which meant that there was less chewing, less digestion. So our teeth, our jaw, and that arch got smaller because we didn't need to work as hard for our food. The face became flatter. Okay, if we were to draw a line here, remember this is looking at Homo erectus, versus Homo sapiens. If we had one of a chimpanzee, it would be even more primitive. But the face became flatter, and that refers to kind of this angle here. If we were to draw an angle between the forehead and the front of the jaw, the earlier hominin species had this kind of big slanting angle there. Whereas if we did the same thing here and drew the line with the modern Homo sapien, that face is flatter. Obviously, the nose itself is not bone, so take away that cartilage. We're just looking at the skull. That is because, as you'll see in one of the next things, the position of our head changed because we were standing upright. Okay? This shows 3 different species there. So Australopithecus, so Lucy, our earliest one, then Homo erectus got a bit straighter, and then Homo sapiens even straighter. Pictures like this come up often in the exam. All right, as I was saying, our head had to be sitting upright as we started walking upright. And if we were to look at the bottom of a skull, so we're like down here and looking up, there is a hole in the base of the skull called the foramen magnum. This is a term you need to know. A foramen is basically a hole, and magnum is large. Okay, so it is a large hole in the base of the skull, and that is where your spinal cord leaves your brain. So it's a pretty important thing. It connects basically your brain to the rest of your body. In apes, or in ancient human species, remember, if they're walking on all fours, the body kind of comes back from here, okay? And so the hole for where the spinal cord would attach to comes from towards the back of the head. Whereas humans, we're now going straight down. Our body is right on top of our head. Our head is right on top of our body, so that foramen magnum has moved forward. Okay, so we often say that it has moved centrally. It's not up the back here like it would be with an ape. It's more in the middle of the skull, and this is due to our upright posture, due to our bipedalism. Okay, so you do need to have notes on all of these. You do need to know all of these. Once you've written those down, just jump in and answer questions 4, 5, and 6. They're just good examples of the way these questions get asked in an exam. This could be a good picture as well to put into your notes, just showing some of those trends in skull shape and size over time. Down here we've got modern chimpanzee and gorilla skulls. So you can see here it's kind of big zygomatic arch. They're really big, strong jaw, big slant in the head. And then on the top side, we've got the human evolution. So this one here is kind of a modern human skull. And we can see some of those trends over time. So they started to get a bit flatter compared to all the way back here. The size of the cranium increased, and we started to get that more kind of defined jaw. You'll probably notice some of these look a bit funny. That's really just to do with what has actually been found. It's very rare to find a completely intact skull. So they might just find a little section like this, and from that they can do kind of computer modeling of what the rest of the skull would have looked like. All right, the next lot of changes we're going to look at are through the spine and the torso. Okay, so really the kind of upper body. Again, if you're thinking about things like the fact that we're walking on 2 legs, we're not climbing trees and living in trees anymore, these will make sense. So first thing, the spine started to curve into what we call the S shape. Okay, the human spine has a curve at the back of your neck here that goes in, then you've got a curve that goes out through your thorax, and then another curve in for your lower back. And it's a really, really, really important shape to support our body weight when we are standing upright. Okay, it means that we can be looking forward. We still have some movement in our body, but our body is held upright. If you compare that here with the gorilla, where it's just that kind of C-shaped curve, it just goes in one direction because of being hunched over to be able to walk on all fours. Another big change is that the rib cage became a lot more narrow. Okay, and also a bit shorter. So you can see that in this picture here. This is a chimpanzee, quite a big, broad rib cage there. Ours is a lot more narrow and also shorter. There's two reasons for that. One is that we don't need as much muscle in our upper body. If you think of like a gorilla, gorillas are extremely muscly. Same as orangutans, they have a lot of muscle in their upper body because they climb trees. We don't need to do that anymore, so we've got less muscle, which means we don't need the bones to support that muscle. And then the other thing is because of our different diet, our digestion is much quicker. Plants take a long time to digest if they have to be fully broken down. A chimp or a gorilla needs a really long intestinal tract to be able to break down all the food before it is turned into waste. Whereas we don't need quite as much, so that tract is a bit shorter. We also got a smaller arm to leg ratio. Okay, so basically what that means is even though all primates have relatively long arms compared to our legs, ours are shorter than, say, a gorilla or a chimp. Again, because we don't need them for walking. Our needs, the way we use our arms, are a little bit different. The pelvis became more bowl-shaped. So if we look here, chimpanzees have a really, really long and narrow pelvis. There's a few reasons for that. One is the way they carry their weight. Their weight is not directly over their pelvis, it's more through their arms. And also the muscles that they have attaching to their legs are a little bit different. They're not as strong as ours. Whereas humans, we've developed this kind of bowl-shaped pelvis. Our body comes right off it here, and we need to have all of our body weight over the top of it. So it's really, really, really important for our walking that we have this wide bowl-shaped pelvis to support upright stance. And then also in females, in female Homo sapiens, that pelvis needs to be really wide as well to support the larger head of babies. Okay, so because humans have a much bigger brain and a bigger head, the female pelvis needs to be bigger to support that during pregnancy and during birth. Okay, just pop in and answer question 7 on those changes. Right, and the last one, which is probably the one that you think of the most if you think about walking on 2 legs, that you're going to need some differences here, are the changes in the feet and the legs. So first thing is what we call the carrying angle. Carrying angle is basically the angle between your hips and your knees. Okay, so you'll see with the chimpanzee, it's pretty much straight. The line from the hip to the knee is straight. There's no angle there. Okay, with the Australopithecine and Homo sapiens, so these are our hominin species, you can see that it goes in between the hip and the knee, it goes in. So that's what we would call the carrying angle in there. You wouldn't ever need to calculate that or anything, but just know it's the fact that our knees go inwards, and that supports us being able to walk in a straight line. We call human gait heel to toe because when you put your heel down, it goes in line with the toe before it. So that angle there is really important. Another thing is that our heel bone became a lot more prominent. And again, this supports that type of walking. Again, if you wanted to get up now, pause this and walk around and just think about the way you walk. When we walk, our heel hits the ground first and then we roll onto our foot and then we kind of push off through our big toe. Compared to most other animals that just put their foot down flat. So you can see here we've got a chimpanzee foot and a human foot here. So chimpanzees kind of just put their whole flat foot down, whereas we go down with our heel and then step off through there. Okay. If we looked at a side-on picture of our foot bones, we have what's called, it's called a calcaneum. You don't need to know that, but a really, really big heel bone compared to this chimp one here. And that can often be seen in footprints. Okay, questions have come up in exams before about this, where it says, you know, there was a fossil of a footprint found. What could tell scientists that that belonged to a Homo species? And the answer could be that it had a prominent heel indent in the footprint. Another thing as well is that the arch in our foot increased. Okay, so you probably noticed that we have an arch on the middle side of our foot. Some people don't have much of one, and that's what's called having flat feet. You might have to wear orthotics, but most humans have this kind of arch in the middle of our foot. It helps us to keep our balance. It makes our walking more efficient. Great apes don't have that. And then the last one is that our big toe became straighter. So our big toe is really important for pushing off while we walk, but also we don't need our big toe to climb trees anymore. So chimpanzees still have this prehensile grip in their foot. They're able to oppose their big toe around and hold on to trees. We don't need that. Our big toe has become a bit thicker and straighter to help us walk. Okay, so again, really, really important that you know each of these and that you can explain why they are important. So once you've written them down, I want you to go in and answer question 8. All right, this is a really good summary diagram. I would probably be taking a copy of this from the slides and putting that into your notes. You could even make just a one-page summary from this, and with each one, explain what the change is and why it's important. Okay, that's really, really important that you can justify why this carrying angle here helps. Okay, so use that, but just go in and answer questions 9 and 10. They don't relate directly to this diagram, but they're just good examples of previous exam questions. Right, so we've looked through structural changes. These next two should be a bit quicker. We're going to quickly go through the functional and the cognitive changes. If you'd like, it might be a good time to take a break now and just try and consolidate what you've learnt with the structural changes. All right, functional changes basically are what were we able to do? So the structure is kind of what changed with our bodies, and now what could we do because of that? And most of these came about because we were now bipedal. We were able to walk on 2 feet. This was really, really important for scanning the environment to look for predators. If you think about walking on 4 legs, your head is down, you're looking at the ground, and if there is a tiger running right at you, you're not going to see it. Okay, for us being able to walk on 2 feet and look into the horizon, like you can see in this little animation here, that was really, really important for protecting us from predators. Another important thing about walking on 2 legs, because of the way our bodies are built, it conserves energy. For us, walking on 2 legs is the most efficient way to get around. Okay, so we could be out all day and not get tired. Okay, so able to walk a long way to try and find food, or to find shelter, or to find other groups that might help protect us. Another thing about walking up straight is that it meant that less of our body was exposed to the sun. There was less surface area in the sun. If we think about the sun kind of coming straight down, that meant that we were less likely to overheat, and again could stay out all day, which is really important for the reasons I mentioned before. But the key things really with bipedalism, aside from being able to protect us from predators, was now being able to use our hands for other things. Because we got mutations in our hands that made them more sensitive and stronger and able to have better grip, as well as being able to use them because we're not walking with them, we could do all of these wonderful things. We could make tools. We could start to control fire. We could hunt different animals. We could start cooking food. We could carry our infants for long distances when we went to go and find food and all of those things. If food was in higher places, we could reach up and grab it. And then finally, this was hugely important for creativity and things like art, which that section has kind of been removed from the study design this year, but it's worth just thinking about as well. But being able to do all of these things, being able to craft tools, control fire, go hunting, and cook food, meant we could eat meat, which meant our brains got bigger, which is what we're going to look at in the next slide. So go in and answer question 11, and then we'll have a little look at how this impacted on our cognitive function. So as I mentioned, our brains increased in size over time. This was due basically to mutations and also due to eating more meat. Because our brains were bigger, and it still needs to be compact so it will fit in our skull and we're not walking around with these enormous heads, the brain structure became a lot more complex. And I'm sure you've seen pictures of the brain many, many times before, but we have all these little kind of foldy bits all through the brain. If we compare that to a mouse brain here, which you can see is really, really smooth. It doesn't have all of those folds. So the job of those folds is to increase the surface area of the brain. Okay, more surface area means more neural connections, which means all of these wonderful things. We're able to have high-level cognitive processes like planning things, like being able to make sounds that are coherent to produce speech, having emotions, being able to think about things that maybe we can't see or that we don't exist, that we don't know exist. Okay, these are all really, really important things that make us humans. If you look as well at this picture up here, it's quite interesting. Obviously, you know, our human brain is bigger than the gorilla brain, so it makes sense that we'd have all these neurons compared to that one. But if you look at the brain of an African elephant, so their brain is more than twice the size of ours, but they have less neurons. Okay, so it goes to show that all of these, the folds increase that surface area to the point where the brain can be smaller, but we have more neurons and more neural connections. Okay, so just go in and answer question 12 on the cognitive changes. All right, I would definitely recommend taking a break here. That should have been a double's worth of work, possibly even a little bit more. If you want to push on, that's fine, but at least take a 10-minute break so you kind of clear your head for the next bit. The next part of the study design, and I'm sorry, I forgot to update those pages. It'll be a couple of pages afterwards. I think it's about 540 onwards, is looking at the human fossil record. But I've included this text here, which is from the study design, about what it is VCAR actually want you to know about the fossil record. So it's the human fossil record as an example of a classification scheme that is open to interpretations, that are contested, refined, or replaced when new evidence challenges them, or when a new model has greater explanatory power, including whether Homo sapiens and Homo neanderthalensis interbred and the placement of Homo denisovans into the Homo evolutionary tree. Big mouthful. Basically what they're saying is this happens all the time. If you signed up to a Google alert on your phone every time there's new discoveries in human evolution, you'd be getting a notification every 2 days. New evidence comes up all the time, and when it does, we sometimes have to adjust our understanding of human evolution thus far. Okay, so there is no way that we want you to know every change in human evolution, but it will come up in the example of like a case study. So you need to know all the trends that we've talked about and be able to apply them to new examples. Okay, so as the human fossil record, and when we say record, basically we're just saying this is just what we have found so far. As the human fossil record is incomplete, We haven't found every fossil that's on Earth. Our understanding is ever changing. You don't need to write this down, but it's just important to know why we talk about this. When new evidence emerges, what we know through the theories or the models that we have created, the evolutionary trees that we've made, are often adjusted. Okay, and that's part of being a scientist. Being a scientist sometimes means that something new comes up, and what you thought was true maybe wasn't true. Another thing that we use a lot now, if it's available, is comparing DNA and proteins. So remember we talked about that a couple of weeks ago as being molecular homology. So if we can compare the DNA or the proteins of both fossilized species as well as current living human species, we can learn a lot about things like migration. So when different ancestral humans moved around, behaviors, so things that they were doing, and also those trends in evolution, what came before, which ones are more similarly related to each other. And like I said before, this kind of stuff tends to be assessed using case studies. So it is important that you understand how this works. One really important area that has come from, analysing different fossils and analysing DNA are two main theories around hominin migration. This comes up in exams quite often. So basically, these are the two leading scientific understandings of how it was that humans moved around the world and when that happened. The first hypothesis, and this is the main one, it's the most widely accepted, there's the most evidence for this, but this is called the out of Africa hypothesis. And this suggests that Homo sapiens, so, our current species, first evolved in Africa, and that this happened 200 to 300,000 years ago. Okay? This theory then says that around 130,000 years ago, some Homo sapiens, some ancient Homo sapiens left Africa. And they wouldn't have gotten far. This is Africa here. They probably would have gotten to around here. But that they either died out then or they went back for whatever reason. Okay. Now, what would tell us that is that obviously fossils have been found that we could date to being 130,000 years ago outside of Africa. Okay, so that would be evidence that some early humans left, but then 100,000 years ago, there were no fossils in that place. So that either all the ones that left this time died or they went back into Africa. But then we do know that populations began to permanently migrate out of Africa from around 70,000 years ago. Okay, and the way we know that is that from around 70,000 years ago, we started to see human fossils all around the world. Okay, it's really interesting if you look at the map here, the way that happened. So obviously they moved kind of directly into Eurasia, which is kind of this area between Europe and Asia, then kind of moving east into Asia, and then being able to cross down into Australia. So Australia, even though on a map it's so far away from everywhere else, we have one of the oldest, we have the oldest indigenous population on Earth, in that humans have lived on Earth for 50,000, in Australia for 50,000 years, and have evolved in this area. This would suggest probably that water levels were much lower and that humans could get across on foot, have some kind of land bridges. We wouldn't have had the types of boats and things that we have now, or even kind of very simple boats. So there would have been some way of crossing, whether that was ice or it was land bridges and sandbars that they could cross with. Then, some of these populations that had remained in Asia started moving up to Russia, across to Europe, and then eventually we had some populations move from Eastern Europe, Eastern Russia, managing to cross again a land bridge over to North America, and then finally traveling down to South America. Okay, this is what the fossil record tells us. The age of fossils found all around the world tell us that this is probably what happened. There is another hypothesis, and hopefully you can pick some holes in this one, but there's another hypothesis called the multi-regional hypothesis. And this is a different theory that says that before Homo sapiens even evolved, that some Homo erectus populations left Africa. So everyone agrees that humans began in Africa. But this suggests that Homo erectus left Africa and went to different parts of the world. And then while in all these different parts of the world, they evolved independently into Homo sapiens. Okay. There are a lot of issues with this theory. One of them being that it's so unlikely that the very rare mutations and things that would have had to happen for us to go from Homo erectus to Homo sapiens, that they would have happened in different places to different groups. It's more likely that Homo erectus became Homo sapiens in Africa, and then it was these groups of Homo sapiens that moved to different places in the world. And that would absolutely explain things like why we have different phenotypes for skin color and height and all of those things, because based on the area of Earth that these Homo sapiens went to, certain phenotypes were more advantageous, certain body builds, all of those kinds of things. Okay, so this is kind of the key one that we believe to be the most likely, but this has come up before in exams, and often you're asked to kind of critique or what could be some issues with that. Okay, so just jump in and answer questions at 13 to 15. All right, another important thing we have learned from the fossil record is that fossils of Homo sapiens and other Homo species have been found in the same place and have been found to be the same age. So we often, look at, let's say, Homo habilis, then kind of evolved to become Homo erectus, then that Homo erectus kind of evolved to become Homo sapiens, but obviously we know there were other groups as well. So we now know that Homo neanderthalensis, or Neanderthals, and another group that's more recently discovered called Homo denisovans, they've been found in the same place as Homo sapien remains and found to be the same age, which tells us that we coexisted. We lived in the same place at the same time with these other Homo species. And there probably are other ones that we don't even know about yet. But these are the ones that we know about, that humans and Neanderthals were living side by side in Eurasia. That's where we have found fossils of both humans and Neanderthals of the same age. And that humans and Denisovans were living together in Siberia. So if you look at this picture here, the purple is where we have found fossils of the archaic African hominins. So that's Australopithecus and Homo erectus. We've only found fossils of them there, which is why our understanding is that humans evolved originally in Africa, because we have not found those fossils anywhere else. Then you can look at the green ones, are where we found, any other humans. So they're obviously all over the world now. We have this darky blue bit, which is Homo erectus. Don't worry about that too much. It doesn't come up. Homo erectus had travelled to other parts of Eastern Europe and Eastern Asia. What we're concerned with here is Denisovans and Neanderthals. So this is kind of where Neanderthal fossils have been found. If your geography is not great, what we're looking at here is Europe and a little bit of Western Asia. Okay, Denisovans were found up here, which is kind of between Russia and Asia, and that's what's called Siberia. Human and Denisovan fossils have been found in that area. Denisovans were very recently discovered, and there's not that much evidence of them yet. But this could well change in the next few years. We might find way more information. Okay, we know they lived in the same place at the same time. Then it gets real, because now if we look at DNA of the Neanderthal fossils that have been found and the Denisovan fossils that have been found, and we compare them with current human populations, so humans that currently exist, we can see that in some human populations, there's a bit of Neanderthal DNA. And in some other human populations, there's some Denisovan DNA. And we know that humans were living with Denisovans in the same place at the same time. We know they were living with Neanderthals in the same place at the same time. Now we've got DNA in the human genome, which tells us that interbreeding was occurring. Okay, and this is a fairly new, when I say new, kind of the last 10 years, this information has become more researched. And there's lots of evidence now that interbreeding occurred between ancient human populations and Neanderthals and Denisovans. And then what's really interesting is that the rates of the Neanderthal or Denisovan DNA are different in different human groups. And what we mean by that is different indigenous populations of certain parts of the world. Obviously, when we look at this, we need to be trying to look at the populations that have lived in that area for the longest amount of time. And this tells us that the interbreeding was occurring in different places at different times. Okay, this is just one kind of summary of information that's been found. Remember when we looked at phylogenetic trees, when you get a line between two things, that indicates that they were interbreeding together. So this tells us we've got the Denisovan line here, and then both of these are the Neanderthal lines, so Eastern and Western. So some of the Neanderthals were interbreeding with some Denisovans. Okay, so there's crossover in DNA between those two groups. If we look at the Denisovans now, this line number 3, Denisovan DNA is found in some modern Asian populations, and it's actually really in oceanic populations, which is Australia and Melanesia and Polynesian places. So Denisovan DNA is in those populations. There's Neanderthal DNA in both European and Asian populations, indicating that Neanderthals were cohabiting and interbreeding with humans in Europe and Asia. Interestingly, there's no Denisovan or Neanderthal DNA in modern African populations, which, if you pause and think for a second what that tells us that this interbreeding was happening after human groups had left Africa. So remember, obviously, some humans, some Homo sapiens stayed in Africa, some went to Europe, some went to Asia, we ended up all over the world. But this interbreeding happened after those groups left Africa, because there's no evidence in modern African populations of Denisovan or Neanderthal DNA. Okay, this stuff tends to make a bit more sense when you actually look at questions and examples. So I want you to go in, answer questions 16, 17, and 18 to do with this. All right, I know that's a lot. Hopefully you spread it out over 2 sessions and you're not too exhausted. That really brings us to the end of this section on human evolution. So we've looked at characteristics, we've looked at these major trends in structural, functional, and cognitive changes, and we've also looked at how the fossil record changes, and it gives us new evidence. Okay, this SAC is going to be Friday of week 6. So we've basically got a week for revision. What I'll do is post later in this week what I want you to do for that, and also I'll make some times when I'm going to be on Google Meet. If you have questions, you want to jump in and ask those questions. Okay, so just make sure you're working through the Google Docs so I can see that you're working and I can mark you as attended. If you have any questions, feel free to email me and we can jump on Google Meet and we can go through them. All right, thanks.